Welcome to Learning Aloud, a podcast from the Organizational Dynamics community at the University of Pennsylvania, produced to inspire purposeful leadership practice and transform organizational experience. I am your host, Stephen G. Hart. My guest today is Dr. Charity Hughes, an experienced HR leader, researcher, and coach. She's worked for global, regional, and local organizations to guide the strategic direction and execution of HR services by providing leadership support to senior business leaders and C-suite teams. As the former vice president of human resources for the North American SCA business, she led the HR cultural and policy integration activities for a $513 million acquisition. After leaving SCA, Charity led the Americas HR team for VWR International LLC. She was able to elevate the HR team to a strategic business enabler while facilitating HR integration for 5 acquisitions. Charity's professional experience includes all facets of human resources, with a focus on executive coaching, talent management, change management, and organizational development. She has fostered improved alignment between various sales and marketing teams, resulting in higher sales and increased profitability. In addition to her work as a coach, Charity teaches leadership as an adjunct professor at Temple University and human resources at Drexel University. She was recognized by the 2015 Pennsylvania Diversity Conference as one of the most powerful and influential women, and was nominated for the 2012 Delaware Valley Human Resource Person of the Year Award. Charity is an active member of the Society for Human Resource Management and has presented at conferences on various topics. She holds a doctorate in organization and management, a master's degree in training and organizational development from St. Joseph's University, and a bachelor's degree in speech communications from Pennsylvania State University. She's a past president of the Philadelphia chapter of the Society for Human Resources Management and is active in various community organizations. So Charity, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me with you today.
Well, I think I met you about 10 years ago when I was facilitating a panel, and we were at the Pyramid Club, as I recall.
Yes.
And you were a tremendous panel member of that on that day. And I remember with greatly your performance on that day, and a real standout in the crowd of the way that you talked about it. So I'm curious, what got you going in the HR field in the first place?
I think I probably got into it by happenstance, actually. I started my career working for Independence Blue Cross as a customer service representative, doing claims, benefits, and so forth. And you know that benefits is a large part of HR. And then moved into the training space and loved that, fell in love with everything that was training and OD, and then just kind of broadly moved into HR as I continued throughout my career.
Yeah, so it's interesting because people are attracted to HR for different reasons. It looks like you have both the what I would call the transactional side and the strategic side. You've kind of loved both of those things, right?
I have to say, I love the strategic side even more, but I think the ability to become effective on the strategic side was because I was raised really on the more tactical side.
Yeah, so you've had an interesting career. You've worked for a number of organizations in a leadership role in HR. Tell us some of the places you've worked.
Sure. So as I mentioned, Independence Blue Cross, I worked at University of Penn Health System for some time. I worked for a company called First Consulting Group, where we consulted in the healthcare space, specifically within IT. And I worked for SCA, now known as Essity, and I also worked for VWR. So worked in a lot of different organizations, a lot of different industries, and have enjoyed my career.
And it seems like you've been involved in a couple of mergers, acquisitions too, from an HR perspective. How incredible was that experience?
Incredible is an understatement, I would have to say. It was educational, it was entertaining, it was inspiring, it was intimidating, it was all of the above. So I so enjoy the opportunity to participate in mergers and acquisitions, it takes a lot. It is all consuming. But as an HR professional, I think it creates the opportunity to be so well rounded because there's so many different facets that you've got to understand and you've got to integrate. So that was probably one of the most beneficial opportunities that I've had is to work with mergers and acquisitions.
Let's dig into that. From an HR perspective, what are some of the things you were concerned about in those endeavors?
Yeah, so you go through any type of M&A opportunity because you either see some sort of synergy from a product perspective or from an operational perspective. And in that synergy, you're trying to harness what the organization can do strategically, but that synergy also then relates to cost reduction because you don't want duplication. So part of what you have to do is identify the talent that stays, the talent that goes. You've also got to understand, even with the talent that goes, how do you create that organizational knowledge that you don't lose it within the organization? So you're looking at that. You're looking at how do you integrate the benefits? How do you integrate the compensation and the job descriptions? How do you make sure that people stay engaged throughout this process? How do you deal with conflict? Because certainly there's going to be conflict along the way. So it's the business side of it, it's the people side of it, and you're really learning on the spot what works, what doesn't, because there's this cultural nuance that embeds everything you do, because you're talking about two cultures that you've got to integrate together. And that means you've got to understand it and you got to observe and you got to pay attention as you are executing against all of these things.
And what did that whole experience teach you about leadership?
What it taught me was that it is important to be present. It is important to understand who you are interacting with at any given moment and what their needs may be. To some degree, it's about how do you be a chameleon, but at the same time, be completely authentic. Be yourself, but be able to flex and be nimble to adjust with what's happening and who it's happening with.
I guess a big part of that too is sort of the level of transparency that you have to sort of demonstrate when you're going through a process like that. How difficult were some of those conversations that you had to have with people?
Oh, wow. Incredibly difficult because you are talking about things that could change someone's whole life at that given moment, whether they have a job or whether they don't. You're working sometimes with people who've been in an organization 20, 25 years. At the same time, you might be working with somebody who just started with the organization and all of a sudden you've announced a merger or an acquisition. So the transparency that you have to come to that conversation with in order to meet someone where they are and in order for someone to understand and embrace the change that you are talking about, there's a level of disclosure and transparency that can't be denied. And for me, I'll be honest, I'm transparent now. It was challenging because I am typically an introvert. So to be able to kind of shed my introversion and be there for people when they need me and in a way they need me was a learning opportunity for me.
Yes, I've been involved in a couple of these, not mergers, acquisitions, but certainly in large size downsizing. And it's been my experience that people want the truth in these things, right? Is that what you noticed also, that it's just not about necessarily being transparent, but it's really about telling people what you know when you know it, even if you don't have all of the answers?
Exactly, because people will read right through you and they're looking for the answers, they're looking for the truth. Because in the absence of the truth, in the absence of the information, people create their own narrative. And most times that narrative isn't positive. It's kind of the worst case scenario that they're contemplating in order to protect themselves and prepare for what they may see as the imminent future. So it's how do we shift the narrative so that it can become positive? Or if there are negative pieces of the narrative, how do we help people deal with it and embrace it in a way that they can move forward as opposed to staying stuck?
And what were some things you had to learn to do in order to maintain and sustain trust through processes like this?
Ooh, so maintaining trust. One, it comes down to what you know, when you know it, and when you can share it. and being real open with people and letting people know what are the types of decisions that are being made and when are they being made and who is making the decision. So that's part of the whole trust. If people can at least get those ideas underfoot, if they know when they can expect certain pieces of data and what that data may impact, that's going to make people feel a little bit more comfortable. So really giving people a timeline, um, even if you can't share all the details, if they know on this date, you're going to tell me this, on this date, I'm going to find out this information, that timeline usually helps to settle people to some extent.
Yeah. So you've had this wonderful career working in HR and different organizations, doing this fantastic work around mergers and acquisitions, but then you decided to go out on your own. And I'm curious, you're having such a great time in mergers and what drew you to wanting to go out and build your own business? Tell us a little bit about the business that you created there, and a little bit about your motivation as to why you decided to do that.
Yeah, I'll start with the latter. So, my decision to go out on my own, I was actually in the midst of doing several acquisitions. Went to a company and they actually recruited me based on the fact that their whole strategy was around M&A. And I was there for a little bit over a year. And within that time, we did 5 acquisitions and then we ourselves got acquired. So it was a very, very active M&A agenda. And at the time, it was so all encompassing with, your time, your energy, all of that. And simultaneously, we were going through some personal issues. So my mom's health was failing. She had another massive stroke. So I was really taking care of her at that point. And the last acquisition in which we were acquired, I knew that they had just hired their head of HR. So I knew that that was not going to be a role that I was going to be filling. So it gave me some time to think about what it was I wanted to do. And I really made the decision to step out of corporate America to take care of her. So as I was doing that, the reason why I really started the business was that we went on a family vacation after my mother passed, and I got an email letting me know that there was an RFP. And while we're on vacation, poolside, I'm thinking, oh, that's nice. There's an RFP coming. That's interesting. And just kind of ignored it, filed it away and okay. We got back from vacation, and the next week I got an email that was direct that said, Charity, did you see this RFP? And then I dawned on me, I said, oh, okay, so this is a little bit more directive, and responded and said, thanks for the information. I'll get you an RFP within a week. So while I was still working, I had some idea that maybe eventually I'll set up a company. So I went through the legal stuff. I, created a name, created the LLC, did all of that, and then just let it sit for months, thinking at some point I'll start something. But when this email came through, I was like, oh, let me get on board and really do this. And honestly, that was what birthed the organization and the firm. Responded to that RFP, got the business, and started moving forward.
Well, I love the name of the company. Yeah, just tell us the name of the organization you created in, because it's a great name. I love it.
Yeah, so the organization is Pathfinder Leadership Group, and I wrestled with what am I going to call this? Anytime you're starting a new business, marketers would tell you, try to start with the beginning of the alphabet. Start with your A, your B, your C. Think of a name that is kind of early in the alphabet. And this was not that. I had to start with what was meaningful for me. And as I think about working with leaders and organizations, so often what I find is people are just trying to find a path to success. So that just kind of resonated with me, Pathfinder. So that's what the name is. And what we do is help leaders and organizations find their path to success. On the individual side, we empower leaders to realize their full potential. And on the organizational side, it's looking at what would be success for you and how do we mobilize your workforce to create that success.
So let's tell me a little bit about how you actually do that. So I love that idea, empowers and enables leaders to realize their full potential by providing goal-focused individual career and personal development coaching. There's a lot in that little sentence
Yeah.
there. So let's get behind that just a little bit and reveal for me some of the things that you do to make that happen.
Yeah, so on an individual side, we do a lot of coaching and training. So we help leaders through executive coaching, whatever that may be. It could be high potential individuals. It could be oftentimes remedial situations where employees or leaders just aren't delivering the performance that an organization wants from them. I would say that most of our focus, though, is really on high potential, those people that are either at an executive level or on the cusp of that in their career, and helping them really create the opportunity that they're looking for, and create an opportunity for them to step into what is their reality, what barriers are there, helping them kind of release themselves of those barriers, and what do they envision themselves, and helping them kind of step into that future.
So as you think about the landscape of leading in today's organizations and the coaching work that you've done, what do you see some of the critical trends in leadership development and leadership growth coming from today? What are the things you're concentrating on?
Wow, so I would say there's quite a bit. One, what I have found is that organizations and leaders really don't like conflict. And I
Mm,
do a lot of coaching around how do you engage in difficult conversations. So there's been a lot of work in that. Other things that we focus on is emotional intelligence. You have some leaders that get it or that have it, but don't necessarily know how to live in it and how to use it. Then you have other leaders where they just really need to develop more emotional intelligence. So we do a lot of work around that. We do a lot of work around leaders, helping leaders embrace change and what that means for them. Maybe they're in a new role and they're doing well. They're a high performer. They've been promoted, but they're still struggling with the change. Maybe because they're leading people who used to be peers, and they're struggling with how do I shift that relationship. So we do a lot around change management as well.
yeah, so we're recording this still while the global pandemic is going on. So have any of your approaches to this work changed in response to what leaders are experiencing, having to work and be productive through this pandemic?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm seeing a lot of work and um, a lot of concern around how do I manage my time more effectively. Where people, I think, traditionally thought if you're working from home, you're not working as many hours, and research is showing us that that's absolutely the opposite.
Not.
As people are
Yes,
working from
indeed.
home, they're working more and more hours. So it's this idea of how do I manage my schedule? How do I effectively create space for when I'm working versus when I need to be alone or have my family time and so forth. So it's a lot around time management, a lot around priority setting. So we're doing a lot of work there on the individual side. On the organizational side, it really is about how do I create team momentum and keep this engagement going. But it's also around this DEI space and organizations wanting to engage in diversity in ways that they have not previously engaged in.
Yeah, so I wonder if one of the things I've learned from the work I've been doing in during the pandemic is that what tends to happen is, in uncertain times, leaders are supposed to have all of the answers to the questions that people have, and they're looking for assurance, perhaps from a leader. And I'm finding that the understanding of the vision, expressing empathy, and being a bit forward-looking are sort of some critical competencies today. Are you finding those same things, and then in what ways are they showing up in the coaching work that you've been doing?
I definitely think they're critical competencies, but I think at this given time, this moment in history, I think those are competencies that people are being challenged with the most. To be able to step up and really get into the space where they're able to demonstrate that has been so difficult for leaders. And I find that from a coaching perspective, yeah, leaders are saying, I'm supposed to have all the answers, but I don't. I don't know what to do right now. I'm struggling right now. I'm trying to find the right answers for my team or the right answers for the organization as we shift our strategy. And I don't know. And from a coaching standpoint, one of the questions that I always ask when I'm confronted with this is, who said you had to have all the answers?
Mm,
Where did that assumption come from?
yeah. Yeah, great advice. I think there so much of what we're doing right now has never been tried before, and we need a culture of experimentation really to make this kind of thing work. I know another passion of yours, as you already alluded to, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tell me a little bit about the work that you've been trying to do. I've been recognized as as a real great force and leader in this regard in our area, and you've done some amazing work there. But tell us how you're helping leaders to understand the power of DE&I.
Yeah, so the work that I've been doing is really spanning the gamut, whether it was people just saying, okay, we just want to have a quick, you know, listening tour, or we want to just have a town hall meeting, all the way to we want to do a full scale organizational assessment and looking at where we might have some gaps and doing some real strategic planning. So it has spanned the whole gamut. And the work that I've been doing a lot of work with IDI, which is the Intercultural Development Inventory, and it looks at cultural competence. So for organizations that are really looking to do an assessment and understand where they are individually and organizationally, I've been using that as a tool that has provided some really, really good insights and an opportunity to both coach and to create strategy around that. A lot of times people really just want to have conversations, and people are struggling with, how do I have a conversation with my team? How do I understand what's top of mind for people of color on my team? And I've been doing a lot of coaching around that. Just how do we have these difficult conversations that traditionally HR has told us we should not have in the workplace?
Mm, yeah.
So it's, how do I
Yeah.
show up as my authentic self, engage in these conversations because they're not easy, but create space for grace, knowing that people are going to make mistakes, but create an opportunity to really drive a deeper connection with my team and within the organization.
Right. So this is exacerbated in today's, because in addition to the pandemic, we've had so much divisiveness and racial unrest in our country here. So how are those, how is that working for you in terms of the approach that you have to take in this regard, those careful conversations? What's changed?
Yeah, so I think, you know, it's a conversation with a specific lens, but at the same time, it's the same skills. So it's the
Mm.
ability to show up and be transparent and be willing to engage in a conversation and appreciate someone else's point of view. So it's all of the same skills, but we're doing it with this cultural lens because we're talking about diversity, we're talking about equity, we're talking about inclusion. At the end of the day, we're talking about difference. And people don't like to talk about difference most times. You know, we want to engage on what do we have in common, and we're socialized to consider and to create relationship based upon what we have in common, not about what is different. So we're asking people, and people want to engage in this conversation about what's different between us, and that's uncomfortable. It's new, and we're asking, do we have the skills? Because what tends to happen out of that is conflict. People see difference as conflict. So it's, how do we engage in what might be perceived as conflict in a really effective way that allows us to get to understanding and potentially resolution, as opposed to creating more divisiveness.
Yeah. So one of the big challenges I think today is getting people to listen to each other, right? It seems that that's a critical skill. How are you getting people to listen to each other in a respectful way in organizational settings and other work that you're doing around this topic?
So I think you really have to start with the end. It's getting some common agreement on the why. Why are we doing this? What is it we're trying to accomplish? What would success look like? And once we can identify that, then when I'm noticing that people aren't listening, I can go back to what, let's pause here. Let's get back to what is it we're trying to accomplish? And another question that I typically ask people, and I actually got this question from one of my leaders when I was working at SCA, you know, what's more important, to be effective or to be right?
Mm.
And so often we want to interject and we want to get our point across because we're focused on, I'm right now, as opposed to what's going to be effective to create more connection. So when we take a step back and say, okay, what are we trying to accomplish here? Do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? Then we can start to get people back to where we need to be to continue that conversation.
Yeah, so we're back to sort of issues like trust, and again, but I think one of the prerequisites for that is how do you create that safe space in an organization for that quality of that kind of conversation to take place, and how are you guiding leaders in that process to help create those safe spaces for people to have the most meaningful conversations?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm doing, I'm actually working on, I'm doing some research right now, and I'm working on a model and a tool. So ideally, I'll be coming out with a new assessment tool sometime next year. And it really is focused on how do we lean into these tough conversations. It'll be a 360 tool to evaluate a leader's capability to engage in tough conversations. So we're looking at having courage to do that, appreciating
Mm.
someone else's point of view, respecting one another in the midst of that conversation, and then empowering each other to actually do something with the conversation. So we're not just having the conversation for the sake of talking, but we are having the conversation to evoke change, to do something differently. And through all of that, we've got to listen. So the idea is the approach is the CARE model. So it is an acronym. And as I said, working on an assessment to measure that. And I'll be excited to launch that sometime next year.
Can you tell us what the CARE stands for?
Yeah, so it is courage, appreciation, respect, and empower.
Okay. So, and how are you conducting this research? What's going into getting this ready for use? How are you researching it?
Yes, I'm working with a couple of other IO psych professionals, and we are creating a 360 tool, and we'll be validating it, asking a few people to participate in a study in order to better understand, make sure that we've got the metrics appropriate, and make sure that we are measuring exactly what we say we're measuring for validity purposes. And then once we feel like we're in a good spot in terms of validity, we'll be releasing it out to the public.
That's very exciting. Yeah. So that's coming out next year.
Ideally, yes,
Very
coming
good.
out next year.
Ideally. Now, I know that another side of your work here is that you are, because you are such a prominent leader in this space, and you're so well known throughout the area and the leadership roles that you've had, you're not afraid to make a stand on things. And I read a lovely article that you wrote recently that was published on LinkedIn called "I Know You See Me." Could you tell us a little bit about the motivation to write that article and what's happened since it's been published?
Absolutely. So, as much as I have enjoyed and continue to enjoy running my own firm, an opportunity has surfaced for me to actually go back in house. So I am excited about the opportunity. I'll be heading up HR for Mastery Charter Schools starting later this month. As part of that process, though, because it is a school, you've got to be fingerprinted, government regulations. So I went to go get my fingerprint done. And when I went, the clerk had some issues, some problems, technical problems, attempting to get my fingerprint because I have a malformation with one of my hands on my right hand. And she tried several times, and it was interesting how she approached it. Each time that she tried, she was very quiet, and the room was starting to get full with other people probably coming for their jobs to get fingerprinting as well. And each time she was having an issue, she would call the IT desk, and then she would step outside instead of kind of talking to me right there in the moment and testing out whatever the IT person said. She would call them. She would say to me, "Do you mind if I take the next person?" She would start with the next person. She would get someone on the line as she was working with them. And then she would step outside to talk to them to see what they would say or how they would advise her to resolve the situation. Then she would come back in, come back to me and say, "Okay, let's try again." Meanwhile, everybody's kind of looking at what's going on, like why does she keep stepping outside? And because they're all seeing everything that happens, and they're seeing that it's not working, and they're watching this. And she would step outside each time, and I was just amazed that she wouldn't just say, "Well, let me keep the person on the phone. Let me keep trying with you to see what would happen." Never once did she ask me, "Has this ever happened to you before? What did they do to resolve it? Have you worked with this kind of application before?" So we finally got it to work after several tries. And when I left, I thought to myself, why did she have to keep stepping out of the room? I know you saw me. I know you see me. I see you. Everyone else sees us. And it's frustrating everybody else because they've got schedules and they're trying to get this done and get out. And it was, "I know you see me. So why do you keep stepping out of the room to try to resolve a situation that's in the room?" So that's what that article came from. And I think the lesson that I learned at that moment is when we try to ignore a difference, it creates more problems, more things that we've got to do, more work. as opposed to just recognizing it in the moment and asking about it, exploring what does it mean and what is the impact, and what has happened in this situation before and what can I learn from this. Oftentimes we just try to ignore a difference thinking it will go away, and difference does not go away.
Yeah, and it's also about an awareness and an open sensitivity to difference as well, isn't it? I mean, it would have been wonderful if the person had asked you, "Have you ever been in a situation like this before? How did we solve it?" But she felt she could either not uh, confront you with that anomaly, or she didn't quite know how to deal with the difference out of the normal process, and so it sort of ended up being more of an embarrassment, I suppose, for her, and a bit of a bottleneck for the organization. So when I read it, I took that same message too. It's about this openness, awareness, sensitivity, but the ability to be able to respectfully and productively engage in conversation that creates a relationship with somebody, right? An important part of the work here is creating relationships with people in organizations so that we're then in a position where we can be more direct with respect.
Absolutely. And I'm not so naive to think that everyone's going to have the same perspective that I am, who might be differently able to, who might have some sort of physical challenge. There may be some people who don't want to talk about it. But the thing is, even acknowledging that, to say, are you okay to have a conversation about this? And they say, well, no. Okay, fine. Respect them. But at least now you haven't ignored it.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting, the feedback that I've received and the response that the article has gotten. So I'm amazed at how many people have viewed it. I'm amazed at all the comments. I'm amazed at how many people reshared it, people that I don't know. So that was humbling to say that something really resonated with people. I had people throughout making comments, even asking me, you know what? Can I read more of your work? Are you writing a book? So that has been quite interesting too. So it has been my own journey, kind of putting it out there, not knowing how people would receive it. I would have to say the most interesting and eye-opening thing for me was, at one point I forwarded it to my son, and my son read it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to me, he was like, "You wrote this?" And I said, "Yeah, I wrote it." And he said, I would have never even thought about this, because this is how I was brought up. I've always known this.
Mm.
So
Right.
I wouldn't have even known to explore the difference, because I've always known you like this.
Yeah.
And he was like, this has always been my life because I'm so attached to you. So it opened my mind to the other side of this, that people that are connected to people that are different, they experience life in a different way as well. It might not be the same as the person who actually has the difference, but it's not the same as someone who's never experienced the difference either. So you've got a group that's also in the middle, that's kind of living vicariously, and their life experience is different because, as he said, this is what I've always known. So now I can say, well, how has that been for you? It's been fine. So it was a little eye-opening for me in that moment too.
Yeah, well, I thank you for writing it. It sort of touched me in a way. I've known you a while, so I knew about the hand that you talked about. But it was wonderful that you put yourself out there like that and shared a personal story. And I think by doing so, you've really encouraged other people and opened our eyes to really being sensitive to the need to embrace difference in a more productive and respectful way. And thank you for that.
Thank you.
And so you mentioned earlier that you're going to be taking this position now as a Chief Talent Officer with Mastery Charter School. So tell us a little bit about what that's going to be like for you. What are you looking forward to in that respect?
So those that know me, they probably know I have this deep passion for education. I always have. Even when I was head of SHRM during my presidency, my platform was on education, because I firmly believe when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, one pivotal aspect of overcoming challenges with diversity, equity, inclusion is education. Education is a
Yeah.
barrier for so many people. So that's why it's always been such a passion of mine. So this opportunity to then go into the education sector, this space, this industry, to one, understand what some of the challenges are, but then to lead the HR team for an organization that is specifically serving the communities that are so desperate for educational change, serving the communities that have been typically underserved, is important to me. So what Mastery has done is they've taken over the schools that have been underperforming for so long, from the school district of Philadelphia, or from school districts in New Jersey as well. And they're approaching the school in a different way, in our way, in the Mastery way. And we're seeing the difference, we're seeing the benefit of it. And I think that that is so profound that I could not say no to this opportunity, because it's mission driven. It's so much about the work that we're doing and the communities that we're serving. So I am just looking forward to making an impact in these communities. That's what resonates with me most.
Can you tell us some of the things that you'll be actually getting in to do right away?
Yeah, so it's interesting because one of the things that we're really going to be working on is diversity, equity, inclusion, from the standpoint of our staff and our faculty, our teachers, as well as everybody in a support function, to look at what is our strategy around diversity, equity, inclusion. And even though as an organization, this has always been something important to us, it's looking at it from the lens of what's happening today and how do we create a positive impact for social justice. Not just small strides, but how do we really make some significant strides for social justice? So we'll be working on that. We're also going to be working on making sure that we can attract the best talent in education. So every school, I think, is being challenged with this, because people just are not graduating in the education space as they once were in terms of the numbers of degrees. But how do we attract, retain, and keep really good talent in our schools? That's the other thing that we're going to be working on.
And you think you get a chance to use your care model in that work next year?
I am hoping we do. Absolutely. I'm hoping we'll get to use it, and we'll get to apply it and integrate it in the work that we're doing.
Yeah. Well, I want to wish you well in that endeavor. I know that the organization is very fortunate to have you on their team, and what an inspiring HR leader you've been in this area. And I'm truly honored to call you friend, and I've loved the work that we have been able to do together over the years. In our podcast series this year, we're asking a few questions off the top of the head.
Yes.
That you have not seen in advance to do that. So I just encourage you, just give me brief answers to these. It doesn't have to be one word for sure, but there's a number of questions we want to ask. These help give our listeners a bit of an insight into the person who's on the other side of the glass here. And so I'm going to ask you first of 5 questions, and just ask you for your quick answer to them. So what is one thing you would most like to do in your life that you have not yet done?
Ooh, walk a black sand beach.
Ooh, tell me about that.
Again, it's different. I've
Is
seen
that
one from a distance.
volcanic? That
Yeah.
volcanic sand?
Yeah, so I've seen one from a distance. I went to Hawaii, so I got to take pictures of it, but to get close and personal and walk a black sand beach, I would just love to do that.
That sounds delightful. Beautiful. So in your opinion, what is one thing the world needs right now to make it a better place to live?
Uh, Forgiveness.
Hmm. Tell me about that.
I would,
Why is
you
that
know,
important?
I would say love, but I think love in the absence of forgiveness will be where we want to be. So forgiveness, we all make mistakes. None of
Okay.
us are perfect. The ability to forgive someone and grant someone grace in the moment so that you can move forward. Um, I think that's the most important thing. If we can learn to forgive each other, we can be a much better world.
Beautiful. So I think I might know the answer already to this next one, because you seem eminently suitable to the job you do today, and perfectly aligned with it. But if you were back in school today, thinking about starting your career, what would you want to be when you grew up?
Mm. Mm. I probably would have studied psychology, to be honest,
Hmm.
because I think it fits with what I do, and I probably want to be either a coach or a teacher.
And you're kind of a hybrid of both of those in the work that you do today. So again,
Exactly.
there's a number of people on the show that we've talked to who seem eminently suitable for the job that they do, and I'm always a bit tentative to ask that question because it usually aligns with what they're already engaged in. Number 4, what hobby or activity outside of your work brings you joy?
Oh, wow. Not, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a hobby. If I'm not at home or working or with my family, you'll probably find me in church. So, faith is incredibly important to me. That's what kind of keeps me going, keeps me sane, allows me to rejuvenate when I'm kind of at that breaking point. So that's probably what I would have to say.
Okay. And what person, living or dead, has inspired you the most?
Ooh, wow, that's a good one. What person has inspired me the most? Wow, I would probably have to say Martin Luther King,
Hmm.
for a couple of reasons. One, I I love language and the eloquency in which he spoke. I would just love to have a conversation with him, kind of get in his mind. But then the impact that he's had on our nation and on the world, um, I'd love to know the backstory behind that. What was going on in his head? What was he thinking through those really, really tough times? So he's probably the one I would have to say.
Truly an inspiring person for the ages, really, in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Charity, it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for dropping by our Zoom room today. It's always a pleasure to see you. I wish you all the success in the world in your new endeavor that's coming up for you at the end of this month and in the end of September. I think you said you're moving
Yes.
into the new position, and we just wish you all the very best in that, and look forward to seeing great things coming from you in the future in that role.
Well, thank you so much. The pleasure is all mine. I've been, um, kind of looking at you too, and I'm just so admired by all the work that you've done, and I appreciate you so much, and really thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's been a great pleasure. So I've been speaking today with Dr. Charity Hughes, the CEO and of Pathfinder Leadership Group, LLC. We want to thank Dan Shields for being our engineer for today. And this has been the Learning Aloud podcast presented by the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for being here today, Charity.
Thank you.